Many of you are upset about the college football playoff selection process and rankings process, and you know what? I am too. So I'm right there with you. There's an argument I keep hearing that I wanted to address tonight. Colin, do you have that tweet? Someone sent this to me earlier today, and it was addressed to like everyone. I was just included. He said, why would Georgia and Clemson or A&M Notre Dame ever be played? Those games were played in the first couple of weeks of the season. It was the first week of the season. Remember, Georgia played Clemson, and Notre Dame went to A&M. He's saying, why even play those games? There's no reward, and the risk of losing is too high. The game suffers. They punish teams for good games. Wet paper sack schedules like Indiana. That's the way to go. Now, of course, the thinking here is Georgia played Clemson, and Notre Dame goes and plays A&M. I mean, A&M lost to Notre Dame, and A&M is kind of being punished for that right now because they are a two-loss team, and it's very obvious that A&M could have just scheduled a directional school in week one. They would have won. And based on the way the committee is handling these teams right now, it seems the committee would have looked and said, good for you. Let's see. Let's squint. Looks like a 1 in the loss column. So they're good. You are what your record says you are. It's a problem. I can't disagree. I cannot disagree with you guys when you point this out. It is a problem. It's a big problem, and you're going to have to address it if you're the committee, or you're going to have a much bigger issue on your hand. Because I was being told a couple of years ago, remember this? Remember when the committee came out and said, we are going to really emphasize rewarding tough schedule. If you schedule tough, if you load up your schedule with challenges, we're going to reward you for that. Well, no, you're not yet. You are absolutely not doing that yet. And you got a really important decision to make if you're the committee. Because as much as I try and defend the committee's logic, like I don't think they've done a half bad job overall, just over the last several years. When people point this out, I just have to cede the point to them. I have to cede the floor. I say, you got a point. I don't know what else to say. You got a really important decision to make coming up this cycle and in cycles to come if you're the committee, because right now you are basically telling the world we are judging you based on your loss column. And if you're undefeated or you're a one-loss team, we don't particularly care how you went about it. We're going to put you higher than two-loss teams. Alabama's the highest-ranked two-loss team, and everyone ahead of them, one loss or zero losses. Like there is no two-loss team sprinkled up there, and it is classic you are what your record says you are ideology, unless you're SMU, in which case you just get the total shaft. But SMU notwithstanding, and I'll get back to them in a second, my biggest concern entering this process, as I shared with you guys, was not we're expanding the playoff. Once they announced they were expanding it, that fight was done. The follow-up was, I'm really worried it's going to devalue the emphasis that's placed on big regular season games. But now I've learned I need a second concern, and that is, will we just flat out de-incentivize playing big games? I thought the worst case was we'll still have a bunch of big games, and the playoff committee will reward someone for scheduling those big games. The problem is with 12 teams in the playoff, those big games won't have the same sense of urgency that they used to have. We used to play these big games in the regular season with no safety net built under them, and now there'll be a big playoff safety net, and everyone knows you can afford to lose, blah, blah, blah. What I didn't plan on was the committee was going to lie and say we're going to emphasize rewarding tough scheduling, and instead they were just going to stick to you are what your record says you are, foolishness, at which case I've got to worry about Ohio State. Ohio State's a perfect example. Ohio State has Texas on the schedule next year. What benefit is there under the current model for Ohio State to play Texas? James Franklin and Penn State went and played West Virginia to start the season, and someone asked him, can you see loading up on these sort of out-of-conference premier matchups in the future? And he was blunt. He said, no, I can't. Because as things stand right now, what incentive is there for us? These guys want to challenge themselves. Everyone has fun playing those games, but if you get punished for losing a game blindly and you get rewarded for winning games blindly, well, just go to the bakery and load yourself up with cream puffs. Everyone wants to yell at the SEC. Shame on you guys for not adding a 9th conference game. Why would you? In fact, not only would I stick at 8, I'd remove all of the premier matchups. I'd go play my FCS. I'd go play 3 directional schools from the G5 at the lower ranks, and I'd force the committee to keep me out. They're not going to do it. They're telling you. It doesn't matter what their words are. Their actions suggest they're not going to do it. So That's a problem. That is a big problem right now that the committee's going to have to face. And if it means swerving on their own logic, if it means swerving on their own preset ideas and I guess the precedent that they've set, that's the word I'm looking for, so be it. But you gotta make a stand here. Now, some other stuff I'm hearing that I've always had a problem with, that you'd think I'd be trafficking in. You would think I'm sitting here releasing my power ratings every Tuesday, right? I release the JP poll, and I'll always say I've got this team way higher than the AP or the College Football Playoff Committee does, and I've got this team way lower. You would think I'd be the first person to yell, so-and-so should be higher than so-and-so because they'd be favored against them. Or so-and-so shouldn't be that high because several teams beneath them would beat them. Well, I don't traffic in that because I don't think that's how this is supposed to work. As much as I just talked about how the committee needs to reward dynamic scheduling, you do also have to balance heavily results on the field. I threw Cannell for a loop the other day. We were doing a live hit, and he didn't think I'd go down this road, and I did. And I said, Daniel Jeremetrius Cannell, you're absolutely right, in theory, that you have to reward and honor merit. And you have to honor the results on the field because at the end of the day, that's all this game is about. It's about playing the games and winning. But unlike the NFL, that is a data point. That is not the end-all, be-all data point because unlike the NFL, we don't all play 17 scheduled games against roughly similar competition. There are Grand Canyons in the differences in strength of schedule in this sport. But what I will not do is I will not ever advocate for what some people, including Nick Saban, advocated for a couple of years ago. I thought Saban was so dead wrong when he was sitting there trying to advocate for Alabama to make the playoff. It was last year, a year before, when they got left out, and he said, well, we'd be favored over the teams that are in the playoff. It doesn't matter because you didn't win your games. If we were doing it that way, we would just look at who has the best recruiting classes over the last few years, which means you got a loaded roster, which means you would disproportionately be favored in games, and let's just usher you into the playoff with a 12-week bye. Why even play the games? So everyone who shouts that at me, why do you even play the games when I release the JP poll? Why should you even play the games? You should play the games to see who wins the games. But if you're still going to power rate one team above the other, even though they've lost to that team below them, then what's the point? Well, this isn't meant to be any corollary to how I think teams should be ranked. I think I've posted that explainer video every day for like 2 years, and it still goes over people's heads. You got to honor the results on the field, but you also have to mix that in helpfully with understanding how to properly diagnose strength of schedule. And another thing that is bothering me a little bit here, I'm just pointing out many of the gripes I have. I know you guys have your own gripes. I'll be happy to listen to them or read them in the comment section. There's this other thing that happens. You may have noticed it. Maybe you've participated in it, where a team like Ole Miss is ranked wherever they're ranked. I don't know. I've got them top 5 in my power ratings. I think sky high of Ole Miss right now. And so let's say you're advocating for Ole Miss to be in the playoff. Some guy's going to come in from the bleachers and yell, they lost to Kentucky. And you probably sit there and you wait for the rest of his argument. And then you realize, oh, that's his argument. They lost to Kentucky. Okay, that's a fact. The sky is blue. Water is wet. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. Is that it? That's it. Okay, well, my counter would be, yes, but they smoked South Carolina on the road, right? Yeah? And they crushed Arkansas, at which point he'll stand back up and say, oh, but Arkansas sucks. Well, they don't, actually. They don't. They're just not a top 25 team, which brings me to my next of the more laughable metrics that the playoff committee uses, and it is that little metric called ranked wins. Ranked wins. What is a ranked win? Well, a ranked win is a win you have over a team that's in their top 25. Question, pop quiz here. Team A has 2 ranked wins, and they're 12-0. Team B has 0 ranked wins, and they're 12-0. Which team has the tougher strength of schedule? You may say, well, that's obvious, Josh. Team A has the tougher strength of schedule because they have 2 ranked wins. What if I told you that Team A beat the 24th and 25th best teams in the country, and then the rest of their wins were against teams ranked in the 100s? Meanwhile, Team B got wins over 26 through 37. Well, all of a sudden, Team B has no ranked wins, but boy, they got 12 wins against top 45 teams. So who has the tougher strength of schedule? My point in going back to Ole Miss is that win at Arkansas. It's just a random game I'm pulling out. They'll get no credit for that. They went and blew the doors off Arkansas in Fayetteville. I got Arkansas at 30th right now in my power ratings. And you can care about that or not care about it, but I'm trying to make a point in that Penn State's the number 4 team in the country right now. And I think Penn State's a little overrated, but I'm okay. Largely, I'm okay with it. They're just a little overrated. I don't have a huge gripe. But my point is, Penn State lost to Ohio State. All right, tough team to play. Lost at home, but still tough team to play. But if you look at the schedule right here, what's Penn State's best win? Most of you would say on the road at Wisconsin, maybe. They won 28-13 there, had backup quarterback in. My point is, Wisconsin's not ranked either. But I've got Wisconsin at 29th. I think Wisconsin and Arkansas are very favorable teams right now. You try and defend Ole Miss by saying they went to Arkansas and won in dominant fashion, you'll get laughed at. Meanwhile, one of the tenets of Penn State's resume right now is, well, they went to Wisconsin and won. And you know what? I got no problem with that being a tenet. That should be a pillar of their resume. That's a really good win. So is Ole Miss going on the road at Arkansas and winning. It's just so predictable how people cherry pick at that point. And then lastly, and kind of addressed this the other night, SEC bias is always going to be front and center in the equation. And I looked at these rankings the other night, and I saw bias. I sure did. I identified bias. I would like to announce to you my investigation is complete, and I did identify bias, and it's Big Ten bias. So, what are we going to do about this? Josh, that's impossible. It's not impossible, friends. Did you see the rankings? Did you take a look at them? Right now, we got, 4 of the top 5 in the Big Ten? And I got no problem with Oregon and Ohio State up there. But, buddy, if you think Penn State and Indiana are truly the 4th and 5th best teams in the country, or even the most deserving teams in the country right now, we fundamentally differ in the way that this thing should be stacked. The whole ranked wins thing we would disagree with. And I would also say, this is not specific to one team. I've also had a big problem with the way we define wins. I've always been a big believer that I would like to define the value of a win or the value of a loss when it happens, and with very few exceptions, freeze it in that moment in time and don't go back and change it. There are exceptions to that rule, but here's the problem I've always had. So let's say me and Jesse get in a fight, and I just beat the fool out of Jesse. I mean, like to the point where he's barely breathing, and he finally gets himself back together after a couple of hours of laying on the sidewalk all disheveled. And then he gets in a fight 10 minutes later with like a 13-year-old. The 13-year-old also gets one up on Jesse. Some dude could be sitting over there watching all this and look at me and say, you know, in retrospect, that win you got against Jesse in that fight is not nearly as impressive because he went on to lose to a 13-year-old kid. And I would look back at that guy and say, sir, that's technically accurate. However, could I suggest to you that the hurting I put on Jesse may have had a significant role in his inability to defend himself against the 13-year-old kid? No one wants to hear it. No one wants to hear it. And that happens a lot. That happens to Jesse when he's fighting a 13-year-old kid, but it just as easily happens in college football when you were one caliber of team early in the year, and then you got beat, and not only physically, but mentally, you're a different team later on down the road, and like all of a sudden you don't get credit, especially you may be the team that did that to that other team. What if LSU were to go and lose to Florida by 10 this weekend? Can you prove that Alabama didn't suck the soul out of their body and make that possible? I've always had a problem with us retroactively just removing the value of wins. Now, I got no problem if you want to retroactively add value to wins. I've never had a problem with that. I would also ask, by the way, if you guys, we got a lot of people watching. We got a lot more people who will watch the replay. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We do the show free 3 times a week. We love doing it. It's just college football. And I would really appreciate it if you guys subscribe because it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't sign you up for anything. It just helps us. And by the way, I hold in my hand a definition that I wanted to share with you, courtesy of the dictionary. Bias. That word's being thrown around a lot, if you'll notice. Bias. What does it mean? Bias is an inclination to favor or oppose a person, a group, an idea, or a thing in a way that's unfair, inaccurate, or prejudicial. Do we have SEC bias out there? Because having a bunch of SEC teams in the top 20 alone is not evidence of bias. It's only bias if it's unfair to have them there. Is it unfair? If not them, who should be there? That's all I ask. That's all I humbly ask.